Good afternoon. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you, and a disappointment that I can't be with you today at the auditorium in Delft, something I fondly remember from the previous aviation-based VSV Symposium 2 years ago, but from a past long ago in terms of actually being an alumnus of this wonderful university. I'm going to try and set the scene for the next session, and I will do so shortly. But again, my thanks to the Leonardo da Vinci Studievereniging. I'm going to take control of the slides, and hopefully you can see me going from 1 and onwards. Let's start by some home truths. I think, at least in my strong view, we can hardly imagine a world economically or socially without aviation. Yet at the same time, we've done an awfully good job in the past 18 months in almost trying to make a world, an aviation-less world, which is quite dramatic. The impact of COVID-19, as I'm sure you're aware, has touched all our lives, but it's been absolutely dramatic in terms of the aviation sector. But look at these numbers and look at how relevant, how important aviation is for the EU as well as for, let's say, the global economy. Almost $1 trillion of US dollars are spent or go around in the European aviation environment, which is roughly 1/4 of the worldwide aviation system. And over 13.5 million people are employed in the EU, 4.5 billion worldwide. Now, the flip side of that, we know how important, how everyday life now seems to be linked with air transport in every way, not only people visiting friends and relatives, business trips, but also the transportation of goods. But the flip side of this is that aviation success has become a risk of its downfall. Aviation emissions, if we look at where they would go, forgetting for the moment the actual impact of the current short-term pandemic, left unchecked in terms of some very important measures that I'm sure the other speakers will also be focusing on, we're likely to be roughly 7-fold of what they were in 1990, or about a tripling compared to 2017, 2018. And this in an environment where pretty much everybody is talking about becoming climate neutral, about a carbon budget which is limited as we move forward in terms of checking climate change as it is happening around us. And I think Bill Gates had a rather perhaps sarcastic way of putting it, but it's not untrue when he compared what basically mankind was doing with respect to the climate and saying it's like getting in your car in the garage, closing the doors to the garage and starting the engine. That's pretty much what we're doing. It says a lot here. Aviation worldwide is, you could say, only 3% of global CO2 emissions. By the way, in Europe, it's closer to 4. I think it's 3.6 at the moment. But it will be, in a relative sense, it will be growing and growing rather strongly, because it is a simple fact is that aviation is a tough environment to decarbonize. Many other sectors will get there sooner, in plain English. And the other thing to realize is that if we're looking at the overall climate impact, as you in aerospace engineering know in Delft, because of some of the really very important research done there and done together with other universities and research establishments, it doesn't stop with CO2. The overall impact in terms of climate of aviation is between 2 and 3 times that. And if we look at that from an EU point of view, I think it's fair to say that roughly 10% of the EU climate change, the radiative forcing level that is due to aviation. So this is an important feature. So we need to really take this in. And the European Union, of course, has been for the past year and a half focusing very strongly on the so-called European Green Deal and a quest to reach climate neutrality across all sectors. Aviation will need to play its part. It will not be exempt from contributing. Climate neutrality in 2050 does not mean carbon zero in 2050. It means, you could say, net carbon zero, meaning that there will be some sectors, some areas of emissions, but they will need to be offset, or they need to balance out with carbon sinks. You could go a step further and say that the equivalent CO2 emissions need to be net zero. It rather complicates the story, but the journey that we need to go to is clear. If you look here at the kind of olive green color within a chart that was produced around the time of the transition from the previous budget and the previous European Commission to the current one, it shows where transport needs to go, and transport needs to be a very strong contributor to this decarbonization. And obviously, aviation is part of that transport deal. Now, most of this is aviation as we know it. Of course, one of the more interesting things looking forward is that we'll find aviation creeping into other parts of mankind's lives. There are many other areas where man will take to the sky, as you can say, taking to the fourth dimension and other means of travel, whether that's urban mobility, whether that's pizza delivery by drone. But all that is not really our current climate problem. All that is future opportunity if we get it right in terms of the technologies. And this is where I think the EU has a very ambitious program. And I'm also very keen to hear from the other speakers in terms of how they view this. Before we get there, though, let's not forget, that something kind of happened on the way to the forum, as they say. We've been through as I said, devastating year in the aviation system. All of the supply chain providing aircraft, providing services, providing maintenance to airlines, enabling them to fly, enabling to transport passengers and goods. I've been through a year of absolute blood on the floor. This example is very simple. It's just Heathrow Airport in terms of passenger numbers in 2020 compared to 2019. And you see here the effect is astonishing. It's really dramatic, and it's not over yet. But we need to not forget something. Those who might think that the COVID-19, the corona pandemic, means that climate is off the table, I would compare that opinion to people saying after 1 week of snow and ice and skating in the Netherlands would equate to no climate change. We know that's not true. We know this will come back. We know people will take to the skies again and fly. The aviation system will rebuild itself, probably not without victims along the way, which is regrettable. But people will want to fly. People will need to have air transport to support them. And so back to an old chestnut, which was created, I think, as far back as 2004 or 2005. The chart on your left-hand side shows a way forward in terms of the ingredients we need to address, the change drivers to reach an aviation system that earns the right to continue in a carbon neutral world or a zero climate impact, net climate impact world. It will not be about only fuels. It will not be only about air traffic management. It will not only be about technology. Clearly, all three of these need to work together. And if we're talking about fuels, let's say the potential for drop-in sustainable fuels is one dimension. Looking forward beyond the first 2 decades, non-drop-in fuels, linked perhaps to the hydrogen agenda, which is going viral, I would say, across many sectors at the moment, is an important feature here. And of course, if you're looking at a non-drop-in fuel, then the whole aircraft architecture will need to start from a completely clean sheet of paper. And this is the task that I think the European aviation sector will be setting itself over the next decade. The next decade, because if we want to have a material impact by 2050, and we recognize the timescales involved in fleet replacement, the timescales in developing a new product, a new aircraft, going through certification, getting the verification, getting the reliability to where it needs to be, getting customer expectations to meet what new products are doing. We need to start now. We need to almost start yesterday. Getting aircraft entering into service around the middle of the 2030s is the absolute latest moment we can do in terms of making a big impact by 2050. We've done with many of our key contributors, companies like Airbus, Rolls-Royce, Safran, Leonardo, basically the background to ATR, both shareholders to ATR. And realistically, if we're looking at the kind of change we need to make by 2035, we need to be looking at, in terms of research, probably around 12 billion in research. But that's not even the beginning to the whole story. The product development after that, our very rough and very crude estimate is something like 50 billion. But the fleet replacement is more like 5 trillion euros in investment. And that journey needs to, as I said, almost start yesterday. So this is a massive investment for the aviation system, and an investment that the public sector will need to support. Now, hopefully I've set the scene in terms of some of the things that you will be hearing from the colleagues later. I'm looking forward to that. Again, it was a pleasure to be able to kick off the session. It's a little bit one-dimensional in terms of wanting to take the climate issue and reinforce the fact that this is still burning in the background, that once we're over the COVID-19 pandemic and aviation recovers, which I'm confident it will be our primary concern. And with this, I'd like to close and allow the moderators to take over. Thank you very much.